We have 2 sessions gone already, one on health and the other one looking at governance. In addition to that, we've also had a fireside chat just looking at the readiness of our capital markets to fund the significant rebuilding that we need to do in the years that lie post-COVID. Our next session is on the fiscal response to COVID-19. And this afternoon, we will be having joining us the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, as well as Engineer Mansour Ahmed, the President of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, and of course, Mrs. Ibukun Awoshika, Chairman of First Bank Nigeria and a big-time business person in her own right. We would also have Professor Paul Collier join us from Oxford University, and as well, we would have Dr. Kalu Idika Kalu, former finance minister, joining us as well. Can you give us a minute or two as we welcome our panelists one after the other, and thereafter this next session will take up. I see that Mrs. Awoshika is on, so is Mansour Ahmed. We are waiting for Professor Collier to join us, and then, of course, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning.
Hello, everyone. This is Zainab Ahmed. I've joined the meeting.
Honorable Minister, thank you so much and welcome. Professor Collier, we also see that you have joined us from Oxford. We welcome you warmly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we will start this session immediately. Professor Collier, you'll recall when we spoke at the weekend, we have never spoken about health scientists in Oxford in all of our conversations, but you will remember that that underlined our conversation, and it just demonstrates the time that we are all in all over the world. I will be starting, as you would imagine, with the Honorable Minister of Finance. And Madam, I welcome you very much and indeed congratulate you for the great work that you are doing, your very steady approach to managing what is a very, very difficult task at a time like this. And I must commend you. I know that our audience will have a lot of questions, but I'd like for you to kick off this conversation by just speaking to the audience for 10 minutes. Nigerians here and in diaspora, investors that are watching from here and from abroad as well, where exactly are we in terms of the fiscal shape of Nigeria today? Madam, you will sing, you are muted.
Okay, let me thank Business Day for organizing this. And also thank you again for allowing me to share the space with Sister Ibuku Awoshika, Mr. Paul Collier. Hi, everyone, Dr. Mansour, and Engineer Mansour, sorry, I always call you Doctor because there's another Mansour Ahmed, and everyone that is here today, not least of Dr. Odisa Ogadebe. I see also Big Sister Obi Ezekwesili is here. Good, it's an excellent panel. Well, where we are today is that as a nation, we found ourselves, just like everybody in the world, in a global health crisis that has very quickly snowballed and become a global economic crisis. The effect for the world is far-reaching, but also so is it for Nigeria. The pandemic has helped us to take a very critical look at our health infrastructure, even at the economic policies guiding our health. It has also helped us to fast-track some key economic reforms which were difficult for us to do so. Because of the decline in the crude oil price, it became easy for us to pull out fuel subsidy. So we used this opportunity to exit from fuel subsidy. We're also way on our well on our way to the path of exiting fuel subsidy as soon as there is improvement in the health crisis. That is one major target we seek to achieve. We also had an opportunity to critically look at some of the key development projects that have been going on in the oil and gas sector. It gave us an opportunity to look very closely into the cost of operations of the oil and gas sector in Nigeria, which is reported as one of the highest in the world today. So it helped us to look at reforms that needed to be implemented. Currently, we're looking at how to right-size government by doing some alignment of government agencies and departments. We're able to further deregulate the exchange rate, moving from an official rate of 305 naira to 316 naira. And we're also on the journey to merge into a single exchange rate, but it's a process. But we made a commitment, and we're going to get there. During this period, we were able to now get the whole of government, and that is the federal government and the state, to step back and take stock and rationalize expenditure. At the federal government level, we're able to review our budget, cutting out expenditure that could wait for a later period to enable us accommodate critical expenditure that is required, especially for us to be able to adequately respond to the pandemic. Gladly, we have a parliament that has been very, very cooperative. Just Thursday last week, they passed the amendment to the budget. A week before then, 1.5 weeks before then, they passed an amendment to the MTEF. This is now allowing us to actually be able to vigorously move ahead with implementation of key government programs and projects that are required to reflate the economy. The president had directed that we must make sure that we concentrate on implementing major priority projects, the key signature projects of government, such as the development of rail, major roads, bridges, power. And we're able to do that because we have had the cooperation of a development finance institutions such as the World Bank. The IMF has already provided a rapid financing facility to us, which has already been disbursed. So we have resources to be able to do these projects. This will help us to reflate the economy. We also have just concluded and handed over and published an economic stimulus plan that has a suite of initiatives that are meant to create economic activity by creating jobs and also providing palliatives not only to the poor and the vulnerable, but also to the very small and weak businesses that are in the sectors that are more heavily impacted by this pandemic. It's a 2.3 trillion naira economic stimulus plan. I hear issues being raised is small for the size of the Nigerian economy, but it's what we can do for 2020. And we need to do a plan that we're able to fund by government revenue as well as by raising funds from development partners and multilateral institutions. Come 2021, we're starting the work on the next MTEF. We will be looking at how we can expand this stimulus package. We have a suite of incentives that we're working on. Some of them already encapsulated in the finance bill of 2019 that was signed up first on the 13th of January. The finance bill provided relief to small businesses by zeroing taxes for them. So we have businesses in Nigeria today whose turnover is 25 million naira and below that are paying no income tax. So their income tax is the company income tax is zero. And then the middle category, 25 million to 100 million, have a reduced tax rate of 20%. We're also looking at how to provide tax relief for businesses that are not within these first two brackets by either deferment of taxes or by deferment on a one-off basis to provide relief The essence for us is we're trying to encourage businesses to keep jobs so that they don't downsize, to maintain production so that they don't have to stop productive activities, to help to continue to drive economic activities. There's special attention that is being given to the service sector, especially aviation, the hotel industry, and such that they also are able to come back to operations and manage at a level that enables them to retain jobs. We will be going to the market, the Nigerian capital market, to raise funds. We have already done that earlier in the year. Even last week, we closed out on a Sukuk bond. We set out to raise 150 billion US dollars. So the Sukuk bond is meant for building of roads, specific roads across the country. The turnout was about 650 billion, which means there is a large appetite in Nigeria, and also there's a large capacity. Investors in Nigeria are actually looking for instruments, long-term instruments, to place their funds, and we're designing these instruments. Some of these instruments, we'll be designing them specifically to be able to give space for pension funds that have long-term money to have instruments that match their investment appetite, so that they can invest also in infrastructure bonds that are Naira denominated, protecting pension funds from exchange rate risks. Let me stop here at this time.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. We will be coming back to you. Thank you. Let me now direct my next question to Engineer Mansour. You have run some of Nigeria's best refineries. When you were in government, you were the pioneer head of the Infrastructure Regulatory Commission, and now you are in the private sector leading the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. Clearly, these pandemics, the health and the economic ones, have ravaged businesses across the country. What are you hearing from your members in terms of what government should be doing for them? How are they and their businesses being affected, and what do they want the government to do? I'm sure the Honorable Minister is listening.
Well, thank you very much, Frank. Good afternoon, Honorable Minister, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I think the first initial reaction of members of the manufacturing sector, and I dare say most of the industrial sector, is anxiety. Anxiety because we are in a situation where we do not really have all the answers, and we cannot predict where we are headed. I believe that this is, of course, common for almost everybody, not just in the country, but in the world. But this COVID pandemic is introducing new indications that people are not familiar with, that people don't know how to predict, and therefore I think we are bound to be anxious. But we are also anxious because of our experience with the public sector economic governance in this country. And indeed, the Honorable Minister just said that they are taking advantage or taking the perhaps leveraging on the COVID pandemic and the current situation to deregulate the downstream petroleum sector. Now, that indeed indicates the kind of problem we're facing, because it seems that this policy is ad hoc and opportunistic. But should economic policy be ad hoc and opportunistic? Should it not be based on a planned and clearly defined trajectory for development? And I think that's where we're starting to have a problem. When people are not philosophy governing economic policies, what is the philosophy governing even social policies? Every change creates anxiety, because then you don't know how government is going to react. But this time we're happy that, okay, government is taking the advantage of COVID to implement a policy that, as far as I know, and you just said correctly, Frank, that I've been in the oil industry for over 15, 20 years. And I know that the issue of deregulation of our oil industry has been on the books since before 2010. One of the major recommendations for Vision 2010 that we should have by now a totally private sector driven, market driven oil sector. And if we had done that, I believe that we all know our oil sector, our oil industry will be totally different from what it is today. So I believe that the first instant, the first feeling of our people of anxiety. How will government react? What will be the consequence of these reactions on our industry and our lives? And whatever reaction, whatever way government reacts, is it going to be sustained? Because even as the Honorable Minister said they are going to deregulate the industry, oil, the downstream sector, our question is, for how long? Is it going to be deregulated just for as long as there is no other change in the oils in the oil market, so that we are seeing $50, $60, $70 per barrel oil? And our experience has been in the past, this has happened. That when the oil industry goes down, we talk about deregulation, we talk about integration, we talk about all sorts of policies that we know we should implement in our country. But as soon as the situation changes, somehow we lapse back into our comfort zone. So that's the basis of the first anxiety, that's the basis of the anxiety that our people felt when COVID struck. And of course, beyond anxiety, we also felt worried and concerned because we know that our industry is already a fragile industry. The manufacturing sector in this country, it has been like that for ages, since we abandoned effective, diversified economic planning. Our manufacturing sector has deteriorated and suffered, largely because we have concentrated on the mono economy. Government has literally cut itself from basic economic responsibility because it has oil. Government has simply abandoned planning the balanced economic growth. It has abandoned the need to ensure a balanced socio-economic structure because government does not need other sectors, it has oil. So I believe that the first thing that we must recognize this COVID has done is to bring it home to us that government must, and I think this has been highlighted in the earlier session, government must go back to principled development planning. And that development planning must be based on a philosophy of economic development that we must accept and own. It must be based on a philosophy that agrees with the situation we are in, agrees with the state of our economy, agrees with the state of our democracy, agrees with the state of our demographics. Because if we don't do that, we'll continue to go around in circles.
Sure.
That is why the manufacturing sector has been so fragile and so unresilient. Every time there's a major shift, every time there's a major crisis, the manufacturing sector and many other sectors collapse. And we have an economy that remains so unresilient that we fear the next change in oil price or the next change in commodity prices, or even the next change in government.
Yeah, that's right.
So I believe like that is the initial thing. However, I believe that apart from the anxiety and the feeling of concern, there is also the recognition that this pandemic has impact not just on our economy, but on our health. And I believe that as employers of labor, we are also concerned with the health of the people that work for us. We are also concerned with the health of our communities. We are also concerned with the health of our families. So what then does this present? It presents us with what I think some professor, I don't know if it is Professor Kolia, called binary choice failure. One way or the other. Whatever we choose, we're not sure that we shouldn't have chosen the other one. Are we going to look after lives, or after livelihoods. If we look after lives, yes, of course, we may save lives only for a while. And then, of course, the lack of care for livelihoods becomes a threat to lives. And I think we are now beginning to see, not just in Nigeria, but everywhere else, that this is a balancing act. It's like somebody who had both high blood pressure and diabetics. You have to try to manage two, because if you just focus on the diabetic, you lose them through high blood pressure. If you focus on high blood pressure, lose them through diabetic. So that basically is the initial intention. However, we in the manufacturing sector recognize this right from the beginning. And we believed and felt that it is absolutely important that we engage the public sector and particularly the relevant actors in government directly. And indeed, we're happy that this is what we did, because since the beginning, I think sometime the middle of January, we have engaged government at different levels. First, we engaged.
Okay, Mansour, I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to you clearly, and I can feel your pain. I mean, all those years in the Nigerian Economic Center, Nigerian Economic Summit Group, all the discussions and all the work done, and as you recalled, in Vision 2010 as well. There is absolutely no way we would have imagined when we were in Vision 2010 that today in 2020, Nigeria would still be where it is. Let me go to my sister, Mrs. Ipokun Awoshika. I welcome you very warmly. You're chairman of one of Nigeria's biggest financial institutions, but you also manage a large business yourself. Can you tell us how different this crisis has been and how businesses like yours are coping?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you, Honorable Minister, and my friend Mansour, for what you said ahead. I think I've spent the last 31 years building the Chair Center Group, which is manufacturing, a company involved in manufacturing in the furniture and security systems industry. And there have been different seasons, obviously, in a period of 31 years. But I guess the most recent for Nigerian manufacturing companies would be when we had the recession in 2015, 2016, and the attendant impact on our businesses in terms of the fact that there is at least about 50% of our input in our production that is sourced internationally. So anytime you have a major situation that impacts on foreign exchange rates and moving of goods back and forth, it would impact on your production essentially. And then obviously, in trying to protect our foreign exchange earnings as well, the country has continued to regulate the products that have access to the foreign exchange in terms of getting the raw materials that is required. That's a different story in itself. But when you think that a lot of the manufacturing companies that suffered one thing or the other over 2015, 2016, 2017, started settling down in 2018 and 2019, you know, and 2020 was meant to be like a cap of restoring companies back to normalcy as things started picking up. Because the market was quite slow in picking up to pre-recession periods. And then all of a sudden, we find ourselves not in a situation that can be compared to 2015, 2016, but worse in the sense that it's a global situation. Yeah. You had no area of recourse. You had no alternate market options that were giving you some sort of relief. Everybody was going through the same thing. And for the Nigerian manufacturing sector, it's a double whammy in the sense that, don't forget that just before we went into the pandemic, because the oil market tanked in a sense, we were already quite stressed in terms of our foreign exchange earnings. Yes. And ultimately that had affected rate And so when you have a loss of value you already had about 15% or so to deal with in terms of cost of some of your raw materials, and then you get to a point within the same cycle that your market literally shuts down. You have hundreds of workers or thousands of workers, depending on the industry you're in. You have salaries, you have people, you have overheads, whether you run for 1 second or you run for whatever amount of time. There is no negotiation of those facts. So in reality, that's where a lot of manufacturing companies like ours are. Your customers, and it's not just about your industry, it's about every single industry, which means even though we're opening up now, and you're opening up a little at a time, your customers are also depressed. So you have issues of receivables. All the customers who need to pay you money have COVID as a perfect excuse. And it's reality. You can see the market. You know what the issues are. So your customers are challenged. They can't pay. Your customers are challenged. They're not making new orders. New businesses are difficult to come by. Everybody's philosophy right now is to preserve your cash flow.
What they have.
Preserve the cash that you have. I'll tell you, there was a study done by Faith Foundation of recent, and it covered almost 2,000 medium, small, and of micro, small, and medium-sized companies in Nigeria.
Yes.
And part of the report says that only about 47% of almost those 2,000 businesses that were interviewed had cash to cover 90 days. You had about another 20 something percent that had cash to cover maybe about 7 to 14 days. And then you had this large group of the others who only had cash for between 1 to 7 days.
Wow.
Now, because really, if you look structurally at how our financing is done, a lot of businesses are dependent on their daily cash flow.
Sure.
There are those that are big enough to have access to financing from the institution. It's good to listen to the Minister of Finance talk about all of the different plans that they have to help reflate the economy by providing capital for businesses at different levels. So it shows that they themselves recognize the problem, and government is proactively trying to find a way to solve that. The challenge is always that there's always so much focus on the micros and the small. And there are many businesses at that level, but there are many businesses at that level that are subsistence level businesses. And then you have from the small to the medium, who are the bigger businesses, who are the real employers of labor. And this is where the jobs that we need to protect, this is really where they exist. But that's the group that we traditionally typically think they should be okay, or they should be able to get money from their banks. Now, luckily I sit on both sides of I have the unusual opportunity of sitting on both sides of the table. And in reality, people tend to forget that banks are not national institutions. They're not government owned. They are business institutions. And the responsibility of the financial institutions is to make sure they run efficiently and generate profit for their shareholders and their
Precisely,
and create value for their stakeholders. So, of course, we cannot exist in a vacuum. The economy and the nation must work for our businesses to work.
Yeah.
And therefore, the banks traditionally will always work with government and with a very strict, tight regulator, setting the pace of how the banks are engaged in the process of supporting government to achieve this. You know that the banks will always play their own role. But even with that, they still have a responsibility to ensure that they do not go on a party in terms of giving out loans and then run up NPLs that, if you look at a country like Egypt, part of what their government announced of recent is a $5 billion bank guarantee to support businesses taking the loans from the banks, which means that, you see, walking through the bank, finding a formula that allows us to use the commercial banks to support the government in a way to support the businesses, but understanding the fact that the banks themselves are a business and creating some sort of security for them behind the scene is far more interesting and helps us to more effectively reach the businesses than if we're running a grant or a government policy, because then a lot of arbitrage.
So would you suggest to the Honorable Minister to examine that bank guarantee model, as a way forward?
I think without a doubt, for a lot of the things that the Honorable Minister has said, which are very positive things that will support the business environment, there needs to be a partnership between the banks and the government, and to find the most efficient way to use the resources available to government, using the infrastructure and the resources of the banks as well, to achieve the most that we can in order to reflate the economy of the country and help the businesses to remain. So we can preserve jobs, we can grow the economy, and we can add the value that we want to create for our future.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam. We're going to come back to you, and I'm sure the Honorable Minister will respond to this Egyptian model. Professor Collier, thank you so much for joining us. Let me say that we welcome you warmly, and would like also, even if belatedly, to congratulate you on the knighthood by the Queen. There are those who say that Nigeria was already, or the economy of Nigeria was already in trouble before the pandemic. I mean, you, more than many other people or many other economists, watch the economies in Africa very closely. What are you seeing, and where does the situation in Nigeria diverge from what you are seeing elsewhere on the continent? Professor Collier.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me back. I'm very conscious that I'm an outsider, and there's very limited things that an outsider can contribute. You know your own society much better than I do, right? I want to congratulate the finance minister on a very sophisticated presentation, right? Many European finance ministers wouldn't manage as sophisticated a presentation as that, I can assure you.
Thank you.
Europe's record is not very distinguished in this crisis. What we're looking at, the animal we're looking at, is what's called radical uncertainty. With COVID, the right answer to the question, what should you do, is we don't really know, right? And if you don't really know, we can't really know, there's two big principles. One is learn as you go. So be prepared to experiment, to try things. Don't think everything will work. No? You'll have to learn as you go and be prepared to error correct. There's no perfect here. There's just learn from trying things. The other is try and avoid things that you will really regret, or you may really regret. The one big message that I would have to the finance minister, that I think she's already very well understood it, is don't miss the chance to reset the national narrative. Previous governments, as has already been said on this, previous governments did try and kick the can down the road in the hopes that the oil price would come back up again, and that missed an opportunity for fundamental change. The shock that you've been hit with, I think, is much it's worse than usual because it's global, but it's a shock which I think is going to be pretty persistent. The fall in the oil price, I think, is not going to recover anytime soon. I think for 3 years at least, we're looking at low global commodity prices and a pretty hostile environment. So I think this time it is different in the sense that it would be really dangerous banking on the proposition oil prices will go back up to $70 within a few months and we'll be all right. I think this time that's very unlikely to happen. And that leads me to the importance of resetting the narrative. And what is the new narrative? It's a shift, the fundamental shift that Nigeria has needed for so long, which is to move resources away from rent seeking into production. And rent seeking means getting money from government in various ways. Production means predominantly for the domestic and for regional markets. You can do some things for export, but the export market for everybody is pretty hostile at the moment because of this global recession. And so, but you've got huge scope for increasing production, both for the domestic market and for the regional markets. So let me talk about a few, first that idea of the push towards increasing production. And first, the fundamentals. All production of any scale and productivity needs two things. It needs good connectivity and it needs good electricity. And for years, Nigeria didn't have adequate connectivity, the transport system, and it's never quite fixed its electricity provision. And now is the time for that. Those two fundamentals. Without those fundamentals, you can't get serious production by serious people. They're trying to work with their hands tied behind. And then let me look at three new opportunities for productivity. Really, one is food. It's frankly ridiculous that Nigeria imports so much of its food. It's a huge waste of foreign exchange to be importing so much food. Nigerian agriculture productivity has been pretty well stalled for decades. So a big push to both growing more and processing more, agro-processing of food. There's huge losses from between harvest and the dinner plate, huge losses, and something like 40% of the crop rots in the journey from the field to the meal, and that's where processing of food comes in, agro-processing, because when you process, you increase storage length. Because basically what you're doing is removing water content. So huge scope for food. It's a very big sector. It could create a lot of new jobs. And it's something that with the shortage of foreign exchange, which is going to be there for quite some time, you need to look at things where foreign exchange is being spent needlessly. Second big area for opportunity is housing. Most Nigerians are really badly housed in single-story shacks, and so igniting a proper, affordable house building program by small construction firms, So a private sector process of providing housing, what's holding that back? I think two things which are eminently fixable. One is urban land rights. People are not going to build until they've got secure and marketable title to a plot of land. And you just have to drive through Lagos and see the signs painted on houses, this house is not for sale. And that tells you at the moment, land rights are not secure, right? So sorting that out once and for all. I hate to hold up an example elsewhere in Africa, but Rwanda did this. It took less than 3 years. It cost $6 a plot to get land registered. Ethiopia managed to do it for $1 a plot, right? I used to work for the World Bank. Don't bring the World Bank in for this. The World Bank advised Tanzania, and it cost $3,000 a plot because too many lawyers, all the lawyers, right? So you can do this fast and simple, and it makes a huge difference. Once somebody's got a legal title to land, they can afford to build a proper house on it. And what's more, that proper house and that plot of land can serve as collateral with a bank. And you need to ignite a mass market mortgage industry. And I mean mass market. In Britain, all the British cities of any note, my own city where I grew up, Sheffield, they got built in the first half of the 19th century. Britain started the 19th century a rural society, ended it a very urban society. The housing got built in the first half of the 19th century when incomes were still very low and people established building societies. There were mutuals, they were very cheap to administer, and they provided mortgages for really quite poor people. And that transformed housing. And it created a huge amount of jobs because building affordable housing is very, very labor intensive. It's a lot of jobs.
Yes.
So that's a big, big opportunity. Land rights and mortgages. Those are that's the sequence, right?
Yes.
Then the third thing to do is develop clusters of firms that have some sort of common sector expertise, and so they help each other. My favorite example in the world is these things on my shirt, buttons. 2/3 of all the world's buttons come from one city in China, which 50 years ago was a fishing village. And it's not that there's one big, it's not that the mega button works there, it's that all the little button firms congregate there because by being all together, they bring each other's costs down. You get a skilled pool of labor that knows how to make buttons. You get all the service industries. And so building these clusters is something that can be done, and it can be done at local government level. You're lucky that you've got this state level system with state governors. State governors need to be developing economic strategies for clustering production, new activities. Let me give you one example from Britain, because I'm working on trying to revive depressed regions in Britain.
Yes.
And yesterday I was working with the government of Liverpool. And Liverpool used to be a very thriving place, and then it went through economic ruin. And now they're trying to bring it back. And so they're thinking, what can we do in Liverpool? What can Liverpool get specialized in? And they've got 3 ideas. One is they're making their universities work with local firms in sort of business parks to develop a cluster working around health sciences. And they've managed to get a very senior executive of Google, who was born in Liverpool, to come back. Now,
interesting.
And he's building that. Now there are brilliant Nigerians all over the international business sector. Now's the time to say, we need you back home,
Precisely.
So that's an example of a cluster. What else is Liverpool famous for? Football. The Liverpool clubs have got 600 million fans worldwide, right? And so that's a huge tourist thing, right? Well, Nigeria's pretty famous for football. The other thing Liverpool's famous for is music, the Beatles. And so it's developed a big tourist industry. And the finance minister was quite right to talk about protecting the tourist industry during COVID. So
yes.
these are just examples of a depressed local region developing an economic strategy based on these are the things we're going to try and develop as clusters. Let me turn from that very briefly, and please feel free to shut me up at any time. I've overstayed my welcome. But I wanted to suggest a few things where you're going to.
I will give you one. I will give you one or two more minutes.
That's fine. There's some things you need obviously to shrink, and one is public sector jobs, another is public sector contracts, and a really important thing that I think I heard the minister talk about was foreign exchange. You're going to have less of it. It's really damaging if the central bank starts to allocate foreign exchange through multiple exchange rates and patronage. Been there, done that, it leads to a big corruption industry. And so unifying the exchange rate around an exchange rate that works for everybody, that's market clearing, that's really, really important. It will also improve government finances because you're a net seller of foreign exchange as a government. And so it will automatically finances.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Prof. If we have time, we will come back to you.
I've finished. Thank you very much.
Let me ask the Honourable Minister to respond both to the points that you have made about the key 3 areas of priorities: housing, food, and creating a clusters of firms, and of course to the point that Mrs. Awoshika made earlier about adopting the Egyptian model of the government providing credit guarantees so that banks can easily lend to businesses. But before she comes, let me take the absolute pleasure in congratulating her on her birthday today. Happy birthday, Madam Minister.
Yeah, I was going to unmute myself and went off. What a nice surprise. Thank you very much. I'm 60 today. It's a special age. It feels nice to be 60.
Congratulations.
Yes, for that. Thank you very much. But just permit me to say to Engineer Mansour that, okay, a lot of things have been done in terms of planning before, very good plans we've had over time. A lot of the plans not implemented. But one thing I've learned over time is never waste a crisis. And this is a crisis that is a global one, and we are doing the best that we can. Like Mr. Paul Collier said, is, do you really know what to do? Not really. You just take one day at a time and you keep adjusting. When we started, we were going to revise our budget. We started by $30. We went down to 25. We went down to 14 because it kept changing. So you have to keep changing as things go. And to my sister, I really want to see this research. It's very interesting that this research of 200 companies that provides cover for 90 days. And you're right. Most of the time in government, when we think of support to the private sector, we're thinking of the smallest of the businesses. We do need to look at the medium-sized to large businesses because they also are large uptakers of labor. We have very good partnership with the bank through the instrumentality of the central bank. The banks have worked with the central bank to provide low-cost funds, to provide some relief in terms of borrowing by extending repayment periods and even in some cases standing down some repayments. The central bank on the other hand, granted some forbearance to allow the banks to do that. So we do have a partnership. Is it in the best of form? No, it can be better. So we need to continue to work more. I know what you said about creating a guarantee. Nigeria is a member of the ATI. This is Africa Trade Insurance Corporation. We had a meeting with them this Saturday. We're looking at how we can work with them to actually make the insurance guarantees that they provide more visible for uptake by Nigerian businesses. There's an agency that is called NISRA. It's an agency under the Central Bank of Nigeria. What they do is just issue guarantee instruments for borrowing to small businesses. Largely, the borrowing is to the agricultural sector. There's also infrared, which is private sector. We're trying to strengthen and grow the partnership between infrared and the Nigerian Investment Sovereign Authority. It has some holding in that. We're trying to see how that can be expanded even more. The view for us is we needed to create special instruments, especially for long-term debt instruments that we're trying to develop that will attract institutions like the pension funds. Mr. Pokolia, I hope you will be able to, or maybe I'll share with you our the just released economic stimulus plan. In that plan, we had anticipated, we have provided for mass housing, as well as an expansion of the agricultural value chain. The focus is not just to provide housing, but to create jobs for small engineering firms, architectural firms, young people, firms that have membership of small membership, 3-5 members of a collection of specialized. So what we want to do is to build 300,000 housing units in this 12 months plan, and it's going to be allotted to 5-10 houses to small businesses. That and the design for us is that on site you will have set up workshops of carpentry, welding. Our target is to use as much as possible made Nigerian raw materials inputs, except where we can't produce Nigeria. We will not be using imported items for the housing. But for the agro processing, there's a program that we call the Green Imperative. We already have a partnership with the Brazilian government, and this is something that has been work in progress for 2 years. It's just been gotten to the point now when we're going to get the final approval. It is a combination of assembly of manufacture of tractors, processing of food, as well as processing centers that are close to the businesses, so that a farmer does not have to own a truck. He can actually lease. So the manufacturers, 6 assembly plants have been identified. They will be given equipment that they will assemble, and then they will now lease to a set of leasing companies that are being registered. These leasing companies are to provide time for farmers to be able to use tractors to enhance and expand their farming. Then the processing centers there will be aggregators that will take produce from small farmers, aggregate it, and process the foods. Our target is that even as we export maize to our neighbors in the region, that we should be encouraging the export of milled maize instead of the raw maize. So we're trying to add value, and in the process, a lot of youths are being encouraged to join the farms. We're working with the states. The states are providing the land. They're creating this cluster of people so that common services such as tube wells are taken to them, power where it becomes necessary, so that they all have reduced costs. Input will be provided to them, good seedlings, the right level of fertilizer in this large cluster of farmers. And there are these off-takers that will take and then process and either sell locally or for export. So that is what we're doing in terms of agriculture. And also the opportunity that you said we have, which is also provided for COVID-19, is to enable us not just feed the nation, but also feed our neighbors. So there's a huge export opportunity that we want to encourage businesses to take advantage of. Not everything in the government economic plan is going to be funded by government. So like I said earlier on, it's 2.5 trillion. 500 billion will be funded by government in 2020. There's another 430 for for the early part of 2021. But about 1 billion of that, 970 billion of that is financing from the banking sector, low-cost financing. In the case of agriculture, we said, okay, we're even going to subsidize the interest rate so that you get as much as possible, an average of 5%, 5% interest rate. So that's what we're doing, and we recognize that we cannot succeed if we don't have a very close partnership with the private sector in this. We also cannot succeed if we're not able to use technology to be able to identify the companies and the people that will be beneficiaries and keep a database of them and be able to track the performance of their businesses as we go along. Even in the social investment program, the palliatives we're using, we will not be paying cash anymore because that is a lot of headache. We're going to be using transfers, using BVNs or telephone numbers of people to be able to reach the poor and the vulnerable that actually cannot help themselves. You're muted.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We are running out of time. So I'm going to give my panelists a minute or two for some closing remarks, and then we will come back to the Honorable Minister to close the session by answering one or two questions from the public. Mansour, I'll take you, and then take Mrs. Awoshika, and then, of course, Professor Colley. 1 or 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm very delighted with Professor Collins' submission that we should take the advantage of this to change the narrative of the Nigerian economy. And I believe that one of the key things we have to do is to actually look at the linkages between what the Honorable Minister has said they are doing in agriculture, which is extremely good and extremely pleasant, with industry. We must strengthen our industry. We must create a resilient industry. If you look at our industries today, the only one industry that perhaps we can say is resilient, is international, and indeed is strong, is the cement industry, because we have taken the trouble to link that back to the mineral source and actually create a strong and sustained value chain across the industry. I think we need to do that in key sectors so that we build the resilience that will take us through the next, if you like, crisis, whether it's oil crisis, financial crisis, or indeed health crisis. I believe that in this context, some of the things that we have discussed with the governor of the central bank and the minister of industry to do with looking at opportunities for backward integration, opportunities for export promotion in terms of looking at those industries that have the opportunity to export, like the minister has said, and opportunities to grow the small and medium industry. I believe we must not, even though, yes, in terms of employment, the big industries appear to give us the opportunity for him. I think the churn of business, the churn of economic activity is largely dependent on the mass of small and medium industries that will create the increasing dynamic economic activity that we need. I believe
Thank you so much, Mansour. Thank you so much. Mr. Awoshika.
Okay, I'd just like to comment about what Professor Collier said about the clusters. Yes. And I always feel sorry for the federal government, because at any point in time, the federal government in the country is the one that takes the flak for everything that goes on or that doesn't work well.
Yes.
But like he said, he's working with Liverpool. Now, the real takers who can make the difference in terms of making the clusters work are the states. And because those are projects that are local to regions, to states, to cities, to towns. And unfortunately, because we have a lack of continuity of government, if one government is in and they understand what you're talking about, when the next one comes for all sort of interest, things get shut down and they don't move things over. These are not new things. A lot of Nigerian reports that have come out of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group or different kinds of groups have had this there. I have personally invested hundreds of millions trying to set up a furniture cluster between Ogun State and Lagos State and all of that. And I lost hundreds of millions of naira because of some of the, that's just the reality. Because you need people who are industry cheerleaders, people who understand each specific industry. They're the ones who can see the opportunities for the clusters within that industry. And if the private sector is not empowered, supported, or equipped, or facilitated to do what he needs to do, if government keeps thinking, and now I'm talking about state governments, if they keep thinking about where their value is or allow politics to come into it, it will never take off. This is the real challenge with this. So we need, I don't know how we'll solve this, but that's something we need to do, but that's a problem we need to solve. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Collier. 1 or 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's all very encouraging because we're all on the same wavelength. And if we're all on the same wavelength and the Nigerian population can get on the same wavelength, then change will happen. And the central message is change is reassuring. The key role of government is to inform and guide and reassure. But the reassurance can't be nothing's going to change. The reassurance is we've got a strategy, and that strategy we'll revise as we go because we don't know everything yet. But we've got a strategy which, as we implement it, we will all be much better off. We'll be doing now things we should have done years ago.
Thank you so much.
And if I could,
please,
I'll close there. Actually, yeah.
Thanks, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Honorable Minister, there's a question that I have from a participant upfield, and I would like you to close with this. They wanted to just know how well you are providing for the funding of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Oh, okay. I think I mentioned this earlier on. It is a fact that the SDGs will see a setback globally, including in Nigeria, and we have to prioritize funding for education, for health, and as well as water and sanitation. In the 12 months economic sustainability plan, there is significant funding for health, for education, as well as for water and sanitation. So yes, we have some setback, but we are reprioritizing because we have to make sure that Nigeria's Human Capital Development Index improves. Right now, our rating is really very low compared to other countries that are our peers and comparators. So we're doing our best to make sure we take stock of what we need in terms of being able to stay on course to meeting the SDG goals. About 2 weeks ago, the UN organized a summit for presidents. There were about almost 70 presidents. Our president was there. It was almost a 6-hour conference. And the discussion is how do we reset our path so that we come back to the right trajectory to make sure that the SDGs do not take too much of a back step in view of the present economic downturn that we have globally, and also the huge expenditure that we have to all undertake to improve on health.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. And once again, congratulations on your birthday. Professor Collier, we thank you for joining us from Oxford. Mrs. Awoshika, thank you very much. Engineer Mansour Ahmed, we appreciate the time you have spent with us. I think we will bring this session to a close so we can give way to the next panel. I can see Achaleke, Charles Robertson, yes, members of the other panel are already taking their seats. Thank you so much, and God bless you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy birthday again, Honorable Minister.
And happy birthday, Honorable Minister.
I'll call you sister. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy your day.
Thank you.